Good morning. This is going to be a response video to Rizzle Dizzle's strategy session for MGTOW. Basically, I'd like to take the third option that Rizzle Dizzle suggested, the MGTOW strategy, and give a variation to that. But I'm going to run through some of my reasoning first because I think it's important for people to understand the thoughts behind a process that leads to a conclusion rather than just accepting a conclusion. So let's go back to the beginning. Rizzle Dizzle was talking about men's rights as legal. It's about a legal situation that we're fighting for. Well, trying to get a clear definition, a clear picture, a clear concept here. Men's rights is not simply fighting for a legal or political state of affairs. Rights are about what makes a thing function right. So, men's rights aim to create a state of affairs to help men function right. But to decide how men function right, one first needs to know what is man. What is man? What is that unique quality that one thinks of when one thinks of the concept man? Surely it is rationality. It's the quality of being rational, the function of reason. It's a higher state of consciousness. It's the drive to truth. Ultimately, the drive to wisdom. And this is so even if the majority of men never find ultimate wisdom but remain experts in worldly types of wisdom like how to fix a car. Well, more on this definition. Should one define man relative to woman? Well, then you have to define woman relative to something else and so on. So one could never really define a man definitively by comparing him with women. To know what makes him function best, you have to look at what he does best, what he is. Don't look at the outside, don't look at the behaviour, but at his mind. Understand him from the inside. And to do that, you have to be mentally male or psychologically masculine. So I believe, being personally psychologically and intellectually masculine myself, that man's best function, his highest achievement as a sex, is the understanding of reality. It's philosophical understanding. It's the use of logic to understand the nature of existence and of self. Okay, so given this definition of man as the lover of reason, the seeker of wisdom, what is needed to help create this state of affairs? Now I'll refer to Rizzle Dizzle's strategy session video. He offers several options to answer this question. With the men's rights movement, or MRM, he sees that radical feminism is an enemy to men's highest fulfillment of their function. So here the first option is the MRM fighting for men's rights in a political sense, in a legal sense. What exactly does this mean? Well, firstly, radical feminism hasn't always been around in its current form, and yet men still haven't been able to fulfill their highest function. They haven't always been philosophers. They're still just chasing worldly wisdom. But I believe the driving causes for radical feminism have always been around. That is, men haven't been able to fulfill the drive to truth and wisdom because of the will to unreason, and the will to unreason is strongly present in radical feminism. That's the driver. Let's look at, what this ideology has achieved in modern society, which is dominated by radical feminist ideology. I'll give you a list. Employing far more female teachers in primary and secondary education than male teachers, which results in boys performing worse than girls, since female teachers don't adequately cater for boys' needs, leading further to higher numbers of females in tertiary education. So while that embodies an attitude of revenge on males or just insufficient understanding of males, which is basically just not valuing masculinity, it doesn't speak of the will to reason, to promote reason in all beings. So this is clearly an effect of the will to unreason. 2, switching the delivery of education to frequent assignments rather than exams, often with intensive coaching and tutorials to enforce the regurgitation of the right answers, a method that is no different to brainwashing and is hateful to a rational person who respects understanding concepts properly. That is clearly a method stemming from unreason. Employing women to balance numbers instead of employing whoever is best qualified, resulting in men seeing that being female is more valued by society than being qualified, than being capable and being able to understand a task properly. Clearly, this equal gender ratios in employment is a method that stems from unreason. Women's studies are frequently offered and well supported in tertiary education, but men's studies are never offered, as if men don't exist. Obviously, that's irrational. There are far more shelters and government-funded programs for assisting women, for example, domestic violence, rape, financial literacy, starting businesses, health programs, and so on. And there's very little for men, despite a great need for them. Again, that's an irrational practice. Continuing the list, men live shorter lives and commit suicide more often than women. Physical health and mental programs nevertheless cater for and are dominated by females, ditto the mark of unreason. Women's issues get far more media coverage than men's issues. Any woman achieving anything gets coverage, whereas a male in her position would not, as if they're a species of farm animal with minimal rights or needs. Clearly not the case. A man who is accused of rape has his reputation publicly destroyed. He cannot regain anonymity and may not only be jailed but also attacked in jail, regardless of whether he's innocent. A man who seeks divorce can legally have his money and possessions taken by the ex-wife, but the reverse is not the case. A man must pay the costs of raising a child, even if he never gave his consent in the first place to having the child born, such as when a woman lies about using contraceptives. And he's lost his income for, could be 15 to 20 years of his life. He'll be poor. It's basically theft, but it's legally sanctioned. It's really true that a woman will support a man to be the parent who stays at home to look after a child, even though looking after a child is generally easier than going out to work. It's really true that a woman will stop to help a male stranger fix his broken down car on the side of the road, whereas the reverse is far more likely, and often to be unrewarded. And men dominate all the risky, difficult, dangerous jobs like linesmen and electricians, search and rescue workers, firefighters, miners, sewage workers, felling trees, flying aeroplanes, driving trucks, fighting in combat, because women don't want to do these dangerous jobs. There are far more workplace fatalities that number men, far, far more. And so on and so on and so on. All these are very common but deeply bigoted practices, and they stem from unreason. So, getting back to solutions again, solutions that help men function to their best, to help create the state of affairs where the will to truth is nurtured, is cultivated. I don't think promoting reason is enough in itself. As I said, Rizzle Dizzle gives several options to men, to help improve their personal circumstances. These are his strategies. 1. Join the MRM, join the men's rights movement, who argue that feminism is the enemy and who fight politically against that ideology, pointing to all the injustices and social dysfunctions it creates, just as I did a moment ago. Rizzle Dizzle says this strategy won't work because it's like a few men begging women or the political system in general to negotiate better terms, but the majority of men don't bother and simply submit. Because of this, they have no leverage. The political system will ignore these few complainers because the majority submit in silence. So the MRM, as Rizzle says, are fighting a futile battle. They're trying to change these practices, but they're not focusing on the core causes. They're focusing on the effects. It's a superficial solution. You have to address the underlying drive to unreason, which is generating all this ideology. 2, you can submit in silence, as he says. You want to live the dream of getting married, having children, having the little patter of feet in the home, working at the job, getting social acceptance. But it's selling your soul, it's selling your conscience, it's selling your mind. That's what your soul is, in order just to feel a little bit happy, sometimes, perhaps, as long as you keep submitting as a slave. Just like most of those really wealthy celebrities, they go from wife to wife to wife, and they get poorer and poorer as they keep going through the divorce settlements, $1 million here, $1 million there. Refer to Esther Villar's The Manipulated Man for more details on how this option works. 3rd option Rizzle gives is a MGTOW, men going their own way. Go your own way, abandon modern society. And this is what Ayn Rand recommended in Atlas Shrugged, and it's what Cyril Kornbluth recommended in The Marching Morons. You just leave them to it. Don't participate. Don't sell your soul. Rizzle also says, let them have academia and see what happens. But he doesn't say, let them have all the children and see what happens. Well, it's pretty dodgy, isn't it? If children are brainwashed by feminist ideology, how many years do you think it's going to take for them to return to normal, if at all? Another problem with this solution is that the MGTOW's flight from modern society doesn't address the psychological problems in young boys that are created by these bigoted practices. Radical feminism creates a majority of masochistic men who are troubled, men who are far more prone to suicide, men who don't look after their bodies and their minds, troubled boys who hate themselves, who hate other boys. Such a social order cannot possibly be conducive to the fulfillment of reason. An individual who thinks he is worthless and no better than a slave tends to have very low confidence and is very prone to anxiety and depression, and feels that the only way to be accepted and safe in society and to fight all these self-loathing feelings is to submit to the status quo and be a worker. And as soon as they lose the job, which is often going to be the case in a society which is highly automated, so there's less jobs going around, we basically have a majority of men who are very, very down on themselves and on other men. So how can you really promote reason in such a society? Women aren't interested, men aren't capable. So I'd like to add a variation to MGTOW, becoming a philosopher.